Welcome to the Disruptive by Design podcast from Signal Media. I'm Kimberly Underwood, Director of Digital News Media at Signal. And in case you didn't know, Signal Media is the official news outlet of AFCEA International. You can check us out on our website, afcea.org. In this episode of Disruptive by Design, I'm speaking with Alisha Kelly. Alisha is in a new role at Trace Systems. She's now in charge of their growth team. She's from Louisiana, and interestingly enough, she knew when she was in school that she wanted to get into the defense and aerospace industry. She started at Lockheed Martin and took off from there. She's been heavily involved in AFCEA International. She's currently the vice chair for women in AFCEA. And before that, she was the co-president of the Emerging Leaders Group for our headquarters, AFCEA. So she's been around the world. She's done a lot of things on behalf of the association. And I love knowing that she's now helping promote women and their accomplishments across the organization and around the globe. And with that, welcome to Disruptive by Design with Alisha Kelly.
I'm sitting down today with Alisha Kelly from Trace Systems. Hi, Alisha. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for coming here. I appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm so glad to visit you and talk to you. I love kind of the amazing things you've done, and I'm so excited to kind of delve in. Can you tell us just background about yourself, who you are, what your day job is, and kind of we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So my name is Alisha Kelly. I have been with Trace Systems, my current company, for a little over 6 years. I actually run the growth team here, so that includes anything business development, capture, proposals, marketing, etc. Sometimes really just whatever the CEO needs on a given day. In addition to that, I do volunteer with AFCEA quite a bit. I am currently serving as the vice chair for the women in AFCEA. I was previously the co-president for the Emerging Leaders, which is, I think, where I got to meet a lot of folks, especially at the international level, and expand kind of my network and my exposure to AFCEA overall. So I've been really expanding over the past 8 or 9 years, a lot of my involvement with AFCEA and advancing my career. So very much looking forward to discussing a little bit about that and a little bit more about AFCEA.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what is, for people who don't know Trace, what do you guys do? What do you specialize in?
So we're a mid-sized contractor. We actually recently had a fairly large expansion, so I won't go into numbers specifically. But we focus very heavily on Department of Defense, information technology, communications, and virtualization. So really working on providing services directly to the warfighter in very globally dispersed locations.
Oh, very cool. And how did you join the company? What's a little bit about your background?
Yeah, sure. So I'm from Louisiana.
Okay.
I went to school in Louisiana, but I knew that I wanted to come to DC. I knew that I wanted to work in defense and aerospace. So I actually ended up with a really great opportunity at Lockheed Martin. I was there for 3.5, 4 years before the merger and acquisition over to Leidos of IS&GS. I was at Leidos for a little bit before I actually got a call from the CEO of Trace Systems, and he said he wanted me to come and work with him, and I've been here ever since. I've been supporting Department of Defense for over 8.5, 9 years now, so it's very much what drives me and what I've become very passionate about. I don't have a military background, but supporting the warfighter and really helping with this mission specifically is very important to me and something that I look forward to on a daily basis.
And what are some of the things you're tackling right now, or in the next couple of months with work?
Right. Well, so I'm actually looking to expand my team overall, our growth team, to try and keep up with a lot of our growth objectives in general. So as I'm working on that, it's really making sure that the people that we bring in are very well ingratiated with Trace culture and with a strong understanding of this mission. Because it's literally what's the most important to everybody at this company. So making sure that we're really pushing heavily forward on that. In addition, it's proposal season, so I'm pretty heavily invested in a series of proposals. Actually had an RFP drop about an hour ago.
Oh gosh!
So I now know what my weekend plans are. So that's gonna be fun. But in addition to that, a lot of what I really want to focus on in the next couple of months is engaging more closely with the military leaders in IT and communications. So I do travel a lot, and most of the reasoning for that is so that I can interact and talk to people and figure out what their problems are, what their issues are, and what their priorities are. If it's something that I can help with, fantastic. If it's not, then I would like to find a way to at least enable them to be more successful.
Right, sure. And I love that you kind of knew that this was the career field you wanted to go into in Louisiana. And I don't detect too much Louisiana in your voice.
Too much.
Right? No, not too much.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have guessed.
It's very intentional, to be fair. I used to have an accent. I no longer do on purpose.
Right. I've gotten the Western Pennsylvania out of my voice, my yins and all that. But I guess, what do you like about your career field? What is great about the defense industry, aerospace?
Mm-hmm. Honestly, my favorite parts about this industry are just the sheer diversity of what I get to tackle on a day-to-day basis, and the people that I get to interact with. I've never been in such a complex environment, really. What does drive me about this industry and what I enjoy about this industry is, as I've mentioned, the mission that we support, the people that we protect, but also the fact that literally from one day to the next, I am doing something entirely different. Part of it is the sheer scope of my job itself, but also everything that I get to do with FCA. Because I was with emerging leaders and now I'm working more closely with women in FCA and the IDEA committee, I get to interact and work with a variety of people on any given day. And hearing their perspectives and how that interacts and how that essentially can change my own perspective is part of what gives me a lot of life, really, and a lot of passion for this industry, for my job, and for the work that I do with FCA overall. I think it's invaluable, really, to be able to interact with people on such an innate level and learn more about what drives them and figuring out how to turn that into a more collaborative environment that can be beneficial for everybody involved in the conversation, but then everybody involved in this overall warfighting mission that we have.
Right, sure. And how did you first learn about FCA? And I guess, what are some other professional development organizations? I don't know if there's any others that you're active with.
So I do focus a lot of time on FCA, and it's because I end up involved in multiple roles. I found out about FCA on a whim, really. I went to a Women in Nova event. So Northern Virginia chapter is my home chapter. And I went to a WIN event, again, 8 or 9 years ago, I think. And I was sitting at a table by myself. And my first FCA mentor, Chuck Corjay, came and sat with me and said, "Why are you sitting by yourself?" I said, "I didn't know anybody." He said, "Okay, we'll change that." And he then voluntold me that I was going to help him on the Army IT Day committee, and it has snowballed since then. For a brief time, I worked with ACT-IAC, which is a fantastic organization as well. I'm a professional member of AFA, NDIA, and a lot of other organizations, but I really devote most of my time to FCA. And a lot of that has been at the international level for the past few years, but over the past, I guess, 8 months or so, I've really gotten more engaged at the chapter level with the DC chapter. So I am on the board of directors for the Washington, D.C. chapter, and I'm looking at next steps and how I'm expanding my role with that chapter for the next FCA calendar year as well. One of the things that I'll always recommend to anybody is to be more engaged and to get engaged with a professional organization, even if it's not FCA or not, something that's immediately tied to your industry. If it's something you are passionate about, it is beneficial to you to be engaged in those organizations. You'll be very grateful for it later.
Right, and we're based in the DC area, so there's a ton, like you mentioned. There's NDIA, AFA. What was the other one you mentioned?
ACT-IAC, ACT-IAC.
Okay, that one I don't know.
It's much more, it's maybe not much more, and it's been a minute since I've interacted with them, but it has a lot of technical focus. So more focused on the technology and catering to people that have technical backgrounds.
Got it, sure.
Not solely, but...
Yeah, and with FCA, we're kind of interested in the electronics and computers kind of vein, the systems. And I love that you're doing the DC chapter and international. Kind of how are you balancing both roles, and tell us a little bit about each role that you're doing now.
Sure. Something that I've learned from volunteering a bit too much is how to balance out the requests and make sure that you understand the time commitment you're signing up for. So with my new international role as the vice chair for the Women in FCA, I have many ideas and many goals. I've only been in this role for about 2 months now, but a lot of what I've been working with Ashley Becker on is establishing and solidifying what that leadership structure looks like. So we're developing committees that are going to have specific leads. We've actually just identified our last lead, so I'm very excited to start actually working with each of the leads of the committees that we have set up to put their processes and their methodologies in place so that we can start accomplishing what our overall organization's goals and objectives should be. I think it's going to be a really fascinating and collaborative expansion of what Women in FCA has been, which has been an absolutely foundational organization within FCA overall. So I'm insanely excited just to be a part of continuing to grow what really Susan Emmert and Ashley Becker started 10 years ago. We're actually on 10-year anniversary. Great time to start getting involved. In addition to that, we are working very closely with the IDEA Committee, so inclusion, diversity, equity, and accessibility, and working with people like Alvy Johnson, Thelma Baker, and a wonderful host of people that are on that committee and are really pushing diversity initiatives throughout FCA as an organization, but then figuring out how that relates to essentially the rest of our professional lives is exciting. It's also a fairly new committee, so being part of Women in FCA, WIA, and working with IDEA at the same time is really going to be thrilling. For chapter efforts, I was asked to be nominated a little over a year ago, or about a year ago, I guess, for the DC Board of Directors, and I accepted, was voted in on the last slate, so it's been very interesting getting back engaged with the chapter. It's been a few years. And I hold nothing against, I miss my Northern Virginia brethren very, very much, but it's been very fun getting engaged with a different chapter that I don't have a lot of insight into. So I've been focusing on getting involved with committees, getting involved with the Winter Gala Committee and the luncheon committees and military IT awards, and really focusing on learning about a lot of the individual events, but also working on a brand new committee to figure out how we can better, raise scholarship funds and work on fundraising. So getting involved in a lot of new and innovative ideas to figure out how we can potentially change things to make it a more effective and efficient organization. I will likely be accepting an additional role within that group. We're kind of working on what that might look like, but a lot of my decision to potentially accept another role was based on how I can balance it out with everything else. Right. So I frequently get asked how I sleep ever. I do find time, I promise. But it's a very important mission for me and a very important cause that FCA really pushes and supports. So it's worth it for me to devote additional time towards additional STEM scholarships, especially. That's something that's driven me very, very far in my FCA engagements. I have a pretty significant passion for advancing STEM within younger generations in general. So I'll continue to do as much as I possibly can until I burn out.
Right. Yeah, it's well, we're blessed to have your passion, both at the international level where I come from, and I'm sure the chapter, not only NOVA but now DC, is thankful for that. And I'm so excited about the new IDEA kind of program. Mm-hmm. And I know at headquarters, as part of our staff, we'll be hiring a person to take on that role. But I imagine that the committee that you're forming, that will kind of create programs for all of AFCEA and the chapters across the U.S. and in the world. I guess, what's the vision there, or what are you excited about to follow in the next, years to come,
And that's what's kind of cool is we don't have all of this established yet.
Yeah.
We're literally bringing in people with different perspectives and backgrounds because we want to figure out how to best apply what we can do at the international level across the board. So there's obviously, we'll continue to maintain an international focus and figure out what we can do at that level, but at the heart of it, the chapters are the lifeblood of AFCEA. If we are not putting something in place that supports the chapters, then I think we're missing something. Right. So a lot of the conversations that we're having are how do we utilize information or best practices from other chapters, either apply it at an international level or just figure out how to distribute that information and potentially pre-existing structures that have worked at other chapters. So that's part of what's really exciting about it for me is we've got gaps in our knowledge base. We don't know what every chapter is doing. And as we're starting to do a lot of the chapter outreach, we have women's outreach leaders that really engage heavily in talking to and finding out what best practices are and what exists, so that we can figure out how to best distribute that information for people that don't even know where to start. It's very similar, actually, to what we tried to do, what we were working towards doing, and I think we did to a certain level of success with the emerging leaders, which is try to consolidate lessons learned and best practices from chapters and distribute that information across, especially because some of the smaller chapters don't have emerging leader groups. They don't have women-focused groups. So they're starting from scratch and don't know where they can access additional information. So providing that forum and providing an avenue for those conversations, I think, is vitally important in order for the chapters to really advance.
Right, sure. And I think I first met you, this was a couple of years ago, even before COVID. We were on the elevator. I can't remember if it was the old building or the new building. Maybe it was the new building.
I think it was the new building.
Yeah, it was the new building. Yeah. And you had just come back from Prague in your role as co-president of emerging leaders to the AFCEA International Conference that was held by one of the, I guess, the European chapter.
Europe.
Yeah, in Prague. And you'd kind of, and General Shea had gone on the trip. Share your view of kind of what you've seen internationally, kind of really being AFCEA International, and especially from that emerging leader side. What's the work been like that you did from that scale, I guess?
Super. And I actually think that one, because Prague was last year, which I was able to go to that one too. I think this was the one after Bratislava.
Oh, okay. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that one was before COVID. Yikes. That was a fascinating trip too, and that was the last one I think that General Shea was able to. General Shea attended before COVID kind of shut a lot of that down. I will say one of the biggest advocates at the international level for the emerging leaders, two of them actually, has been General Shea in his previous capacity, but also General Staudiker, Eric Staudiker, who is the general manager for AFCEA Europe. He's a massive advocate for advancing emerging leader initiatives within his purview within Europe. It's a very different and in some ways more difficult initiative. So we can have a lot of these conversations, but ultimately we have to look at international focus on emerging leaders, or potentially in the future women in AFCEA, in a slightly different light. We're facing different challenges. So a lot of it, and a lot of the reason why I made the trip to Bratislava, why I made the trip to Prague last year, is very specifically because I don't know them as well. I don't know the issues. I don't know what we're facing necessarily from a European perspective. So it's literally, in my opinion at least, it's sitting down with people like General Staudiker and other chapter level supporters like Harry Larson, like Peter Jurasik. So there's a number of chapter leaders and regional leaders within the European theater that have different perspectives based on where they're located. These are all different countries as well, whereas in the U.S. we're very vast just within U.S. chapters, but we're all U.S. citizens, right? Yeah. So when you're looking at Europe, while everybody in theory is part of NATO, it's a different country. They will usually speak a different language, and while they'll have in many instances English in common, there's different initiatives and different focuses that each of them is going to have. So Europe is a very diverse cultural kind of milieu, is a different monster to tackle. Right. But I loved at least getting to start that conversation. Obviously, as I'm not in that role, I'm not really finishing that conversation, but I'm still supporting the emerging leaders and how they continue with those international relations. Indo-Pacific is, again, a very different story. And a lot of it comes from, as a U.S.-based organization, we're looking at it from a U.S. perspective, and we have U.S. military bases located throughout the world. But how do we interact with the, with Japanese and Korean people, for instance, who are potentially joining AFCEA organizations or AFCEA chapters that are located to them locally? In addition to that, we're expanding into South America, so that's another entirely new culture and organizational group that we need to tap into and figure out how we can help. So from an international perspective, it takes more people and more work and more effort, which is difficult in a volunteer-driven group in general. But I think it's worth the effort to continue at least having those conversations, even if it's just a one-on-one with pick a location. So Harry Larson is a good example. I've talked to Harry for a number of years on how we can advance emerging leaders initiatives in his AOR, and we've done a lot of a lot of our best work if we can possibly continue pushing it, but it's difficult looking at it from an international lens versus just a US-based lens.
Right, and I'm sure that international perspective will really help as you go into this new role for AFCEA International. And why are those voices important to bring in, the idea community, or those, I guess, concepts into, kind of the international perspective?
Because nobody operates alone. That's from an individual perspective. That's from a company perspective. No one company operates on its own. You have to have partners. No one country operates on its own. I think we're seeing it more now than ever, really, with a lot of the issues that we're seeing in the EUCOM and AFRICOM theaters of operation. We have to better communicate and work with our mission and coalition partners. We, as an organization and as a country, cannot operate in a vacuum, especially within EUCOM. And I've had the pleasure and the honor of being able to talk to a number of leaders within EUCOM who share that exact goal, that exact perspective of we have to better engage and coordinate and talk with our mission partners and our coalition partners in order to be successful, because we have different information that we can potentially share. So from my perspective, from an industry, from my professional and my job, my career, to my AFCEA life, I think that that's a gap that's bridged, because without actually speaking and working directly with coalition partners, we're sitting on an island by ourselves, and we're going to continue to struggle.
Right, yeah. It's a lot. But the threats are such that I feel like we have to do this.
Absolutely.
That game, the standards have to be raised of integrating and bringing in new voices, and we're going to need every tool and every talent we can, I think.
Especially as we face peer and near-peer threats. Yeah. We have no recourse but to collaborate and work with the people that we know are trusted partners.
Yeah. Anything else you wanted to highlight about what you're passionate about, or advice to maybe senior leaders about these other communities, whether it's emerging leaders or the idea communities? What can they pay attention to, or what advice would you tell them?
So a couple of pieces from my previous role in emerging leaders and my existing role in women in AFCEA is, and it ties back exactly to diversity. So diversity is many, many things. Diversity is including women in the conversation. It's including people of color. It's including people of different backgrounds, different orientations, different religions, different however you want to define it. But it's also including people of different age ranges, because we all grew up in separate generations, right, with different perspectives. The point of diversity and why it's so valuable and invaluable, really, is to bring in multiple perspectives and opinions to the conversation, so that we're not getting into this state of groupthink where we're just essentially saying the same thing over and over again. We need different opinions and need other perspectives in order to actually change the conversation, in order to advance as an organization from an AFCEA perspective and from a Trace perspective for my company. So I think it's vitally important for us to really continue to highlight diversity across every avenue, really. And I'm saying diversity, I do mean idea as an entire concept, but we think of diversity as kind of covering a lot of these aspects. But being able to actually work together with people with different backgrounds and different perspectives and give them a voice is only going to make your organization better. I do firmly believe that, which is why I'm very excited to be a part of these organizations moving forward. So for senior leaders, the main aspect of that would be take a look around the room when you're in your meetings. If you're the one running it or if you're just in there as an attendee, take a look and see who is in that meeting. I've been wildly outnumbered in the majority of the meetings in my career, which is fine, but we can do more about that. We can do more to actually promote that level of diversity and that level of additional information and perspective in our discussions. It's only going to make us better. And actually a friend of mine, another AFCEA colleague, actually has given me another idea. He recommended take a look at the events that you're at as well, because I'm on the planning committee for a number of events. Take a look at the events, because if your panels are starting to reflect diversity, that's great, but is that showing up in your audience? So is the audience starting to actually see that level of diversity and feel more comfort in being drawn more into these industry events. So from an FCA perspective, that's something that literally I learned this week, and I'm going to take back. In every event, I want to pay attention to who is here, and are we doing our jobs well enough, and how can we improve? Right. And I would put that out to any leader anywhere, senior, junior. Keep that in mind as you're looking at the room that you're in.
Right, yeah, I didn't think of that perspective, but who are you pulling in? And then do you have advice, you mentioned you're expanding your team, do you have advice to young people who are coming up? What kind of skills do they need? What kind of advice would you give to them about kind of not only working in this industry, but kind of being able to succeed in any job or any role? You know, what does it take? You know, what kind of skills do you need?
I have two things. And I say this to every person that ever comes to work on my team. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Especially if you're younger and newer into a career or a job or anything, really. You're not expected to know everything. You are not going to look dumb if you ask a question that you think might be a common question. If you don't ask it, you will never know, and you're honestly much less valuable to the team that you're trying to be a part of. So you're not expected to know everything, but also make sure that you have that drive to learn and help, that willingness to learn and to help the organization that you're a part of, the team that you're a part of. That's how you're going to add value. But never be afraid to ask the question. If somebody does, for whatever reason, look at you like you're inappropriate or wrong for asking this question, then I have issues with that person. Right. The second piece of it is get involved in an organization. And I kind of hit on this already. I obviously will continually recommend FCA. I put a lot of my time and effort into it for good reason. But if there's another professional organization or anything that you're really passionate about, and there's a way for you to find engagement and involvement in some sort of a group or organization, do it. There's always time for tomorrow, but you will absolutely benefit from it, and you'll thank yourself later. And the other part of it is you really only get out what you put in to an organization. So if you're going to do it, step up as much as you can. Obviously, don't actually try to burn yourself out. I don't recommend that for anybody. But be open-minded and look into those kinds of groups.
Right. That's great advice. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, I greatly appreciate you, Kim, and the Signal team and the FCA International team for continually being supportive of people like me that really just want to come in and figure out how we can add value. You give us a platform, you give us an opportunity, and I greatly appreciate it and look forward to continuing to work together.
Yeah, absolutely.